It seems that we are good to go. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you joined the lunch. My name is Antonios. I come from Greece, and with Rafael, we are going to present you our work regarding the evasion of IPS systems by abusing some IPv6 features, the so-called IPv6 accession headers. This session is going to last about an hour and a half. I would suggest to make this session kind of interactive. I mean that don't wait the end of the talk in order to raise your questions. As you go, you can raise your questions related to the topic. I believe doing so will be more interesting and you will not miss anything. As far as I'm concerned, I'm just an IT security enthusiast. Sometimes I do some research for fun. In this work also, NORA participated. NO leads ERNW. And most of the work was done by Rafael.
Yeah,
a few words about you.
Yeah, I did write my bachelor thesis at ERNW about this topic especially, and I worked together with Antonios, and he wrote this little tool for me, and I could play with it and found some interesting stuff regarding extension headers in IPv6 related to IDS devices, and we will see in the presentation.
I believe that your microphone is off.
Do I turn it on?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
By the way, his grade in his thesis was 1. For those who are not familiar with the system in Germany, for those who are not German, perhaps, this is the best possible grade, which I didn't know, to be honest, but so he got for this work the best possible grade for his thesis. Yeah. Okay, this is the outline of the presentation. First of all, we will do some introduction to the accession header stuff. I'm sure that many of you have heard about all this functionality. We are going to summarize very briefly some key issues regarding accession headers, the key issues that we are going to abuse in order to achieve our evasions. Of course, we will describe the problem, we'll describe the mess, and then we will proceed with our IDS devices. Are going to present results for 4 different IDS devices. 2 commercial ones, Tipping Point and Sourcefire, and 2 open source ones, Sourcefire and Snort. As you saw, we were able to evade all of them. And in total, we found about 13 evasion techniques or so.
12, 13, something.
Some of them were circumvented more than once, which means that we broke one system, we informed the vendors or the developers, they fixed it, we broke it again, they fixed it, broke it again, so on, so on. And one of them actually still suffers from a kind of problem. Yeah. And in the end, we're going to discuss some mitigation techniques, and of course, we will draw our conclusions. Okay, the question is, okay, what's new in IPv6? Of course, everybody knows the huge address space, but as you all know, this is not the only difference in IPv6 in comparison with IPv4. One of the many new things are the so-called accession headers. A very brief comparison. At the top of the slide, we have the IPv4 header. The key issue here is the fact that it's 20 bytes long, at least the basic part, but it can carry some options. And so the length of the IPv4 header can vary from 20 bytes to 60 bytes. On the other hand, the IPv6 main header is 40 bytes long, which is bigger than the minimum size of the IPv4, but its size is constant. Another observation here is that the IPv6 main header has been simplified significantly in comparison with IPv4 header. You can see that many fields which are here do not exist in IPv6 main header. Some of them have been totally removed, or some other have been moved to the so-called accession headers. For instance, this flag, the don't fragment flag, is not used anymore. It has been totally removed because fragmentation does not play, is not allowed to take place in the routers in the IPv6 world, while this was the case in IPv4. In IPv4, a router can fragment the packet. However, although the main header has been simplified, which is good for the routers because they don't have to process so much information, the problem is that this is how the IPv6 header chain looks like. And I usually here makes a joke that the IPv6 main header looks like a German train. Okay, you have the machine here at several wagons after that. The reason that it resembles the IPv6 datagram with a train is that in reality it looks like this. Okay, you have the main header here. You have the layer 4 header here. The main header is constant, as we saw. It's about 40 bytes, which is good. But this main header can be followed by none, 1, 2, 3, or more, with practical no limitation number of accession headers. So more or less, you don't know what to expect here. And the point is that all this information here is kind of still layer 3. This makes things quite complicated. One observation is that each accession header must be a multiple of 8 offsets in order to keep the alignment, which is of course good. But still, this kind of IPv6 datagram is the root cause of 3 significant problems. First of all, we have quite a few accession headers. In the very first IPv6 specification, the so-called 2460 IPv6 specification, the hop-by-hop header was defined, routing header, fragmentation header, destination option header were defined. Moreover, IPv6 adopted the IPsec headers, known from the IPv4 world. A while later, some more extension headers were defined, like the mobility support header, the host identity protocol header, and the level 3 multi-home mixing protocol header. And who knows, tomorrow, some more may be defined. This is an open option. And actually, this was the case why extension headers, let's say, were invented, to allow the extension of the protocol later on without putting any restrictions. The point is here that there is a recommendation, and this is a key issue in many, many RFCs, that they are just recommendations, so they don't have to be followed strictly. And so there is a recommended order, which more or less is the one that appears here. Moreover, there is another recommendation that each one of them should appear at most once, with the exceptions of the destination options header, which should appear at most twice. But again, no one says that if there are more than one, let's say, routing headers, the packet must be dropped. This is not the case. The only restriction actually is the hop-by-hop header. In the case of the hop-by-hop header, is the only case where the RFC specifically says that there must be only one hop-by-hop header, and the hop-by-hop header must follow the main header. This is the only strict restriction. Now, another RFC later on, RFC 7045, specified that any forwarding node along the IPv6 packet delivery path, including routers, but also including firewalls, should forward the packet regardless of any extension headers are present, which means that they should not process the packets. They should not process extension headers, and they should not drop a packet if they do not know an extension header for whatever reason. Of course, they must also recognize a deal, at least all the standard IPv6 extension headers, the one that we presented in the previous slide. So, up to now, we have seen a kind of few flexibilities regarding the number of extension headers, their order, and now we see here that some intermediate devices like firewalls, they are not allowed to drop something if they don't know what it is. Which is specified exactly here, that they should not discard packets containing unrecognized accession headers. So, problem one, we have too many things to vary. We can vary the types of the accession headers. We can vary their size. Some of them have variable length, as for example, the destination options header or the hop-by-hop header. They can be from 8 bytes long to even 2,000 bytes long. It can be done. We can also vary their order. Okay, we must have the hop-by-hop header in advance, but then we can have the routing header, the fragment header, destination options header, or the other way around. We can also vary the number of occurrences of each one. We can have one destination options header, 2, 3, 5, practically no limit. And of course, we can vary the fields. Okay. Yeah, can you hear me better now? Okay. Okay, so more or less, I would say that the IPv6 datagram looks like a function with several variables in there. This makes the IPv6 datagram to be a kind of unpredictable. Problem number 2, fragmentation. Fragmentation was a problem itself in IPv4 world. I'm sure you have heard about fragmentation, overlapping techniques, etc., which kind of, they were fixed at some point. But here, in IPv6, since you have the accession headers, the situation is much more complicated. For instance, this is an initial IPv6 datagram, which needs to be fragmented. We have the unfragmentable part and the fragmentable part. The unfragmentable part consists of the IPv6 main header, of course, and the accession headers that must be processed by intermediate roles, like the hop-by-hop header or the routing header. All the other accession headers can be placed or must be placed in the fragmentable part, so they can be fragmented. So, if we want to fragment this initial datagram, let's say in 3 fragments, each one of these fragments will carry the same unfragmentable part. After the unfragmentable part, we put the so-called the fragment accession header. The fragment accession header includes information like the offset, the fragmentation ID, or the more fragments to follow bit, which were included in the IPv4 header before. And finally, after the fragment header, we have the 3 pieces of the fragmentable part: fragment 1, fragment 2, fragment 3. Of course, these blue sections here can include one or more accession headers if required, which is good and bad, of course.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Wasn't there an RFC that said that the fragmentable part should not contain any extension headers anymore?
No, the RFC recommended that all the accession headers, if they are part of the fragmentable part, should be in the first fragment, including the layer 4 header, so as a firewall would be able to examine even the layer 4 header.
But this is a very new RFC since 1 or 2 years.
Yes, exactly.
So not everybody has implemented that. And
Exactly, and this is only one problem. The RFC itself, it says that, okay, the sender must not include an accession header in the second fragment, but the firewall or the router may drop if it is not in the first fragment. So there is still some liberty here. I mean, that they don't say they must be dropped. But yes, actually this was a problem why this, it was 7112, RFC 7112, that specified that all accession headers plus the layer 4 header should be included in the first fragment, which is actually a good mitigation technique in most cases. Problem number 3. The question is how these IPv6 accession headers are changed together. In order to do so, in each accession header, there is a kind of pointer. Each pointer, called next header value, points to the next header. Each header has a value. It's similar to the known protocol value which we used in the IPv4 era. For instance, the protocol value of TCP is 6. The protocol value of IPv6 is 41. The protocol value of destination options header is 60. So in our example here, the main header, the IPv6 main header, includes a protocol value of 43, which points to the routing header, which follows the main header. And the routing header itself includes an next header value with a value of 60, which points to the destination options header. And of course, the destination options header includes the next header value of 6, which points to the TCP header. This is how the accession headers are chained, how this train is chained together. So far, so good. I mean that this is a really good technique, very easy to follow. We just have to find out what the next header value is in order to identify the next accession header. No problem until here. The problem comes into place when you need to fragment these chains. For instance, let's assume that this is the fragmentable part of an IPv6 datagram, which means this is a part that needs to be fragmented. Before fragmentation, we have a destination options header with a next header value of 60, but it points to 6, the next one, which the next one is TCP. It will be fragmented like this. We will have the main header, which points to the routing header, as before. Now this one has changed. Now it's 44. If we go back in our example, where was it? Here. The routing header here was pointing to 60 because the destination options header was following the routing header. Now it's pointing to 44 because we have added this fragmentation accession header. And the value of fragmentation accession header is 44. So something changed here. But still, so far, so good. We have the main header. We have the IPv6 routing header, which points to the fragment accession header. And now we have the fragment header itself. We have here the part 1 of the fragmentable part and part 2 of the fragmentable part. The question is, what should be these values here? I remind you that the first, in our example, the first header is the destination options header, which value is 60, and the next one is TCP header, which value is 6. So, what do you think? What we should put here and what we should put here in order to chain our fragments? Any suggestions? The first one could be quite, let's say, obvious according to the previous example. It should be 60 because what follows is the destination options header. The second one?
Depends on the fragment size.
Okay, let's assume that the first one is the destination options header, and here we have the TCP header.
So the fragment, we have our header chain above, the destination options, the TCP payload, and we split this in 2 fragments. In our first fragment,
let's split it here.
Yes,
exactly
only
here.
the destination option header, and in the part 2 we have the TCP.
This is just an assumption for our case. Let's assume that it is split here. What would you put here? 6. Okay. Any other suggestions? No suggestions, or you don't? No idea. Okay. Well, this suggestion actually makes sense because, okay, since TCP is going to be here, why not putting 6 here? It is a very normal suggestion. However, it will be 60, or at least it should be 60. In reality, actually, it doesn't matter, to be honest. This value, the second one, of the second fragmentation header doesn't matter. And why is that? Why we do not need to chain this fragment header with this part here? Because this header here, TCP header, let's say, is chained from the destination options header. It's changed anyway here. So we do not need to put 6 here. According to the RFC, this one should be 62. All the fragment accession headers should point to the first accession header of the fragmentable part. But there is a kind of flexibility that RFC suggests that, okay, since it doesn't matter anyway, what you should always check is the accession header, the fragment next header value of the first fragment accession header, and not the other ones. So these ones actually do not matter. Anyway, the reason that we introduce this case here is that another ambiguity is introduced. And we are going to, let's say, exploit this ambiguity in order to evade one of these devices later on. So, to sum up the mess regarding accession headers, we can vary the types of accession headers, their order, the number of their occurrences, their size, their fields, the next header values of the fragment accession headers, and of course, we can vary the fragmentation, where to split the fragment. Here, there, later on, etc. Oops, what happened here? Oh, here it is. And of course, we can combine them. We can create a combination. There is a kind of law. It is called the Postel's law, which was established a few decades ago, actually. Briefly, it says that be liberal in what you accept and be conservative in what you send, which was a very good approach in order to achieve interoperability. From this perspective, it was really good because you are conservative in what you send, so you do not surprise the other side, but you shouldn't be very strict in what you accept. So you should, let's say, show some flexibility, which was quite a good approach during this era, but in the latest years, there are some, let's say, movements that suggest that perhaps this law should be reconsidered, just because this flexibility introduces some security issues. Okay. I like flexibility. I mean, flexibility gives you a lot of opportunities. But the problem with the flexibility is that inverse proportional to security. You can abuse flexibility in order to break security. And under some specific circumstances, it can lead to a complete chaos. And I believe that accession headers is the most suitable example of such a case. And the reason is that the techniques that we are going to demonstrate here regarding the DPS devices can be used as they are or by small variations against some other devices. For example, against ACLs, access control list, to evade some other mechanisms. Like, I'm sure that you mentioned in your workshop about the RA guard or the IPv6 guard. You can break all these things. I don't know if you discussed it.
Yeah, some part of it.
Yeah. So you can use this exactly the same techniques in order to evade some other, let's say, protection mechanisms. So what can go wrong? Well, more or less a lot of stuff. In our case, DPS devices usually use a kind of signatures in order to detect malicious traffic. They more or less operate like, let's say, antivirus engines. They have some signatures. So if you manage to break this signature, you can break the rule, and so to evade the device. By breaking the rule, you mean to construct accession headers chains in a way that they create, let's say, unexpected or unusual datagrams not recognized by the IDPS device itself. If you think that all this is about the theory, actually it is not. We have developed a tool called Chiron. There are some other security tools out there that are very good regarding IPv6. I would say that the advantage of this tool is that it more or less allows you to construct any single IPv6 header chain you can imagine. So you have the power in your hands. You can test it, you can try it, and if you find the technique, you can even use this in order to launch your attack for real. By the way, tomorrow is going to be a workshop regarding this tool, tomorrow afternoon, where it will be delivered by Rafael and I, which will also include a kind of CTF in the end. So one of the challenges actually is going to be to evade one of these devices on your own. Okay, our test at a glance. As I said at the beginning, 4 IPS devices, 2 open source, 2 high-end commercial ones, Sourcefire and Tipping Point, really expensive ones. At least 12 evasion techniques in total were found out. All of them 0 days when we found them. All of them were reported to the vendors. All of them were disclosed responsibly. Most of them were patched really promptly. Some developers reacted really fast in a couple of days. Some others not so fast. But anyway. And one of these solutions, one of these open source solutions actually still suffer from a 0 day. What they're going to show you or to suggest a kind of mitigation technique, which of course breaks some functionality, but at least will protect you for the time being. The first one is going to be the suricata evasion. I'm going to hand over to Rafael.
So, the first IDS device or IDPS device was suricata, open source software, and it's a kind of there are 2 main open source solutions for IDPS device. One is well-known Snort, and the other is quite a new one, and it's called suricata. And we started with version 2.0.1 and found some technique to evade that. We talked directly to the developers, said, okay, we found some problems here, and after a few days we got patched, looked, okay, this kind or this specific evasion we found was patched, and we worked again on some other tests, some other combination, and then they already released our recommendation and patched it, and so we continue on version 2.0.2, and same here, we found something, said it to the developers, and in this case even we only told them one combination. We found several ones. We said, okay, we gave them an example and said, okay, here, this is one example, but we found some more. Please check. And they patched it and sent us this version back. And I tried some of the examples, didn't work anymore. And then I go on a presentation, pre-presentation of our talk. And on the preparation, I tested some other examples, and there I found another one which works again in the same combination.
A kind of variation.
Yes.
The big problem that you can vary many things.
And all of these evasion techniques we found can be reproduced with Chiron, and I will demonstrate the latest one. And this is how it looks like. We have our IPv6 fragment. So this is the first part. We have our unfragmentable part with an IPv6 main header and type 0 routing header. And then the fragment header comes into place, and our fragmentable part is one destination option header and the TCP payload header. Like in our example on the few slides before, just very simple. And it is exactly split like in this example. The destination option header comes first, and in the second fragment we have our TCP header and more.
The interesting stuff here is that, except from the evasion technique itself, we have used as an example the type 0 routing header, which has been deprecated. Some of you were at TERIC's talk in the morning, where it was mentioned that type 0 has been deprecated a few years ago. But we have found out that still many systems accept this routing header.
We even, at the beginning we looked at the Ricardo, we found out they have no rule for type 0 detection. We talked to them and they said, oh yes, we forgot about that, and they patched it in it, and after that we changed from type 0 to any other type, since type 3, type 1, since they are not deprecated, since the type 0 header is recognized, but not our other rule to detect the TCP header. So we have two rules set up on every device. One rule to detect the simple IPv6 ping request, and the second rule is to detect a simple TCP port 80 SYN request or something on port 80. So some time for action. I hope you can see everything in place. I have to switch. Oh no, this was wrong. So, for the first time, I will send just a simple ping request to the Ricardo machine, and as you can see here,
there are several alerts.
Several alerts. To see that there's nothing comes through, I will clear the log more or less, and you can see even here our ping request.
The traffic. So Ricardo is configured to raise alerts in our example here. It doesn't block the traffic, the malicious one. But for our demonstration purposes, the alerts are more than enough.
So, our command, you can see here, is in the first part you see the routing header, and the second in the fragmental part will be the destination header. And if I will send this, we see in the log nothing changed, nothing at all.
You see the request, the reply, but no logs.
And in this part we see the two fragments. If we open this one, can you see routing header, fragment header, next header should be destination option header, here's the destination option header, and then comes the IPv6. So just very simple combination. This combination can appear in your network or in the internet and should be detected from...
Can you send a simple ping again?
Yes.
By the ping command to show the logs again that... Not with Chiron. Simple ping, yes.
It's the same.
He removed... what he did here, he didn't use a ping command, but he removed the commands that introduced these accession headers. So this is a simple ping, and again alert is raised. Any questions up to now?
Okay. So, coming back, this was the Ricardo and version 2.05. We hope, or we think, they patched every of our findings. I've tested some other combination. It worked very well, even though they told us that they did another patch, so it should be now working better. And they were very kind and very interested in IPv6. So they asked even us if we have any recommendation how they can handle IPv6 extension header, and so they were very interested in that. So the next device, or in this case, we have a device itself, is from HP, a tipping point. And we started last year before Troopers, exactly.
Actually, it was, yes, in February before
Yes.
Troopers. In Troopers 2014,
Yeah.
during the summit, we announced that we found a 0-day against tipping point and had informed the vendor, but we did not disclose any detail by this time because it was still 0-day. So it was about in February of 2014, yeah.
And so how does look the old evasion? We first found it was, as we described before, with the fragmentation and the next header value in the fragment header. And we especially think about that, okay, what could possibly go wrong if we just change one number in the second fragment? So let's assume we have a destination option header and TCP payload part as described a few slides before, and we changed in the second fragment, we sent in the fragment header the next header value to TCP. Okay, our device should recognize TCP, and we want that it will even block TCP traffic. So we sent that, and the result was quite interesting, since even Wireshark has some problems with this. And as you can see here, our first fragment, next header, destination option header, and this is our second fragment. What we now see is, okay, recognize TCP is the next part, but it has some interesting information about what port it will reach. And the destination port in the TCP part is, according to Wireshark's reassembling, 256. This is wrong. We send it to port 80.
And why is that, actually? It is because Wireshark and tipping point believes that here, in the red area, TCP header starts. So this 0100, according to Wireshark and tipping point, is the destination port, which is a value of 256. But the real TCP header is the yellow one. And you can see here 50. In hex 50 is the decimal 80. This is the destination port of the TCP header, and not this one here.
So
this is why they are confused.
Wireshark looks at the fragment header, see, okay, next port is, next header should be TCP. So everything coming next in the reassembling process is interpreted as TCP. And that is what we think is the same which is tipping point doing. So we have no look at the source code or how it really works, but we assume that this is the kind of why it didn't come through. Or better, it comes through, but it didn't show up in our log. So we reported that to the vendor, and they, or before that, we even tested we tested if blocking HTTP traffic, and then we additionally tested, okay, let's use a real signature rule from tipping point itself with a cross-site scripting, and we wrote a little packet which has some XSS in it, and we tried it with this as well, and we get no alert.
Actually, yeah, is there a question?
But the receiving hosts had no problem with
No, it had no problem because the receiving host complied with the RFC. The RFC says that we should examine the next header value of the first fragmentation header. The other ones do not matter, actually. So it was good for them.
So the host is just exactly go to all the, collects every fragments, and it looks in the first fragment header, looks at the next header value in the first fragment header, and just looks in the other fragment header, just the offsets. So to get the right order of the packet, and doesn't look at the next header value. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah, you would think it's the same with Wireshark.
Yes, it should be, but in Wireshark, I think the thing is that they reassembled every packet for itself. So they did not collect the whole fragment thing, so there could be some, but yes,
And
it should be the same.
There were also several modes in tipping point regarding they offered, let's say, protection. And there was also the so-called paranoid mode, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, we tried this even against the so-called paranoid mode, and it still worked.
So very aggressive, all
Yes.
rules on and everything, nothing comes through. Nobody uses it in his environment, since then you have several issues on productive traffic as well. So, okay. Yeah, we reported that to HP, and they sent us a patch, or they released a patch. And we said, okay, let's see if it works. And we tested our command, and okay, everything fine. So then I started with my thesis research, and I looked at tipping point itself again and did some more research on it. And we thought, okay, they patched it, but something looks not right. So what we saw is that the first fragment every time comes through. So the only packet which is blocked is the second fragment. So if we send the command, you see the first fragment comes through, and then the second fragment doesn't come through. So we started with some variation. Let's change here the next header values. What is if we're changing that? Or here some other values. Or, okay, let's chain it to 3 fragments. And finally we thought, okay, what is if we just send the second fragment again?
Twice. Yeah.
Twice. What happened? What could be happen if we send the second fragment 2 times? Exactly the same packet 2 times. And we was quite surprised. The second time it comes through. So
the same fragment. The first time it's blocked, but when you send it again, it comes through.
And even though it doesn't matter if the second fragment and the first fragment, or in the fragment which is blocked, if the next header value is 60, the real, or 6, but if we send it again, the next header value should be 6, or must be 6 to get through. Could be other values other than 60. So to show you what...
And an interesting thing about this evasion technique against tipping point is that this technique is effective even when 7112 is implemented. I mean that you do not have to move the layer 4 header in the second fragment in order to be evaded. It can be the first fragment. So it is one of the cases, this technique, where 7112, the RFC that recommends that the layer 4 header should be in the first fragment, is not effective. This is why we say that this RFC is very good indeed, as a mitigation technique, but it is not a panacea on its own.
For the demo, we will show the old evasion technique, since I have to restore the old image for our CTF for tomorrow. But if we have time tomorrow, I can patch it during the session, and I can show the new or the latest evasion technique, since this is patched as well. But that you can see, okay, first fragment is blocked, and then second fragment comes through. I will show you how the packet will look in Wireshark as well, but in this case, we will see that both fragments will come through.
In this case, the target is not a virtual machine, it's my laptop over there. And tipping point is configured to block traffic. It's not that just raising alerts, it will block the traffic.
So, 7.7 or 7.8?
7.7, I changed.
Okay. So first of all, I will show that I can reach the target over ICMP. Let's get a ping reply back. So I will now try it to reach it over port 80, TCP SYN.
Tipping point is configured in our example to block HTTP port, TCP port 80. I'm not running a web server in my laptop, but when it gets the packet, the SYN packet, will respond with a reset packet.
So I can see I sent my SYN packet and nothing comes back.
And of course, you have an alert. It's not a tipping point one.
No,
It's from the
this is
suricata, yeah.
suricata. This can be ignored. So the next one is I will launch my command. This is the first.
This is where you defined the next header values, 60,6.
And if I now send this one,
And you see that we send the same packet and we get back a reset from my laptop over there, which means that the packet passed through the device, reached the target, and the target responded to it with the reset packet.
and to show you after they patched it, now the command is looking more or less similar. And on my laptop you see first fragment, the second fragment, which now is reassembled already in Wireshark. But on the target machine we would see this fragment. So the first fragment here would be blocked from tipping point, and the second fragment would become through, since it's the same packet. And then we get a reset back. We also see in the tipping point, since we use a block rule which writes no alert, so we only see a block counter. We even see that they block one package, but only one, so not twice. So the first one is blocked and the second comes through.
Any questions about this? Okay.
So let's continue, but we can now turn this one off.
Yeah. Change the cables, okay. You can continue with this sentence.
So, okay, we looked at tipping point, and last but not least, we started with Snort, and at the end we also had a SourceFire appliance available, and since SourceFire use a kind of, or they use one Snort version and develop their own patches for that, so it was more or less quite the same Snort version, but some improvements from Cisco SourceFire itself, and the other was the public available.
Actually, when you started, Snort was better than SourceFire itself.
Yes.
There were at least 2 evasion techniques against SourceFire and just, let's say, 1 against Snort. But in the meantime, after reporting them, SourceFire has been patched, while Snort is still vulnerable to this attack.
The communication with Snort and SourceFire was not that well as with tipping point and suricata, since we developed yes, and no response directly after some time, and Snort said, okay, yes, we will think about that, we will have that in mind, but it's not that important. And from Cisco SourceFire, there was even which kind of, is SourceFire now?
They told us to contact with the customer support. We told them, okay, we'll try to help you here, you have an issue. Don't tell us to go to the customer support. We should be interested in this stuff.
We think that this is because Cisco bought SourceFire and they have some unstructured, and but went not that well. So we decided after some time to publicly disclose this. And
that point was still a 0 day. Sometimes yes, disclosing publicly something helps to push vendors to fix them.
And latest Snort version comes with some kind of mitigation technique. We think this is not in response on our evasion or our finding, but even it will help a little bit.
It's a kind of response to our previous comment, Black Hat US.
Yes.
Where you said that minimizing the number of accession headers okay, it's a good, effective approach nowadays since more or less we don't expect to see any accession headers in the real world. But in ideal situation, it's not the best, let's say, way to handle it. I mean, that you should find the proper technique to detect the attack, not just to drop everything.
Yeah. We will come to this later.
Yeah.
So, in the meantime, Sourcefire silently. We didn't hear anything from them, and in February I looked for new versions in preparation for our talk here at Troopers, and saw some patches, and I applied all of them, and then I started to test it again, and some weird things going on. We have to look at it again, some deeper, but for now, at the moment, our finding was patched. So,
okay.
We will now come for demonstration for Sourcefire again.
We should also tell you that there are several rules, both at Sourcefire and Snort, which are not pre-enabled by default. If you do not enable them on your own, evasion is going to be even easier. Really, in order to be, let's say, fair against the products, since we had this kind of background, we tried to enable every single rule which could help in the detection of the attacks, as long as these rules did not, let's say, trigger any false alarms, of course. And so we enabled all the specific IPv6 rules.
That's clear. So again,
You don't have the. Are you taking Sourcefire or Snort?
Sourcefire.
Sourcefire, okay.
Yeah.
Sourcefire is also configured to block the traffic. So if you see a response, it means that it has been invaded.
So first of all, I will send a ping again to see. Okay, I can
There
reach
is
the
connectivity.
target.
Okay.
And this one should not be go through. Yes.
A SIM packet which was blocked. And this is Snort, isn't it? Over there?
No, this
No.
is
Suricata,
not
still
Snort,
Suricata.
This is Suricata.
Where is
Okay,
Snort?
so this is Snort, but we will not see anything at Snort. since
Ah, okay, yeah,
I
you're
have
taking
not-
Sourcefire. Yeah,
Yes.
So we had the SIM packet with no response.
And now that is
The ping again.
this is wrong. This is with ping.
Can you also clear the WireShark logs?
Yes,
in order
sure.
to- Okay.
Sometimes it take a little bit longer for the device to do some checks, and after that it let it through, hopefully.
What about resending it? Is there an issue with the interface? Or?
The correct rule. We can try the other. What I now
Yeah,
will
try the other one.
I will try. We have found some other combination, so I will try this one. Let's see if this is working. Wait a little bit.
Did you bring the patch to Sourcefire?
I hope not. I think not.
Okay, give it one more try, and then we'll demonstrate it with Snort.
I can try the very first one we found. Oh, no, that's even the wrong.
Okay, here it is.
This one.
Yeah.
I will show it
Can
again.
you show the, yeah.
So. Oh. So
Okay.
this is even without fragmentation, this one. And here, as we can see in the command above, we just sent a simple TCP request, and we did kind of 9 destination option header in a row between this. So we have our IPv6 header, 9 destination option header in a row with empty, so nothing in it, and then the TCP part. And so even without fragmentation, we can get through it. Since this one should not be appear in the wild, or is even according to FC not recommended, but it's not disallowed. So it can be some case that you need 9 destination option header. But
it's a problem to discuss that the RFC says that there should be 1 or there should be 2, but in the end, there can be more than 1 or 2 per type, etc. So in this case, there were 9. And the interesting stuff is that the target responds to this traffic.
And so we now can switch to source file, to the Snort, since this is again a virtual machine on my laptop. I will just send. Just a simple TCP request, as we can see in the log above. TC test VV activity, so something appears. I will now clear a little bit more the log. And we should even see a response where I don't know why this is not responding, but I can send a simple ping. Is this one responding? No, not just okay. But for demonstration purposes, you see there's something appear in the log, and if I now this is the same command as I used for SourceFire as well, which not worked there. And now I had nothing in the log. To be sure, I sent this time a ping package. I can send it as well as an HTTP. So first fragment, second one TCP, even though nothing more in the log.
Okay, let's just
So, yeah.
This is how the first evasion technique against SourceFire worked. In the fragmentable part, we had used, let's say, 3 destination options header. And after that, in the first fragment, we had a destination options header. In the second fragment, we had another destination options header plus layer 4. In this case, the next header values were the correct ones, meaning that we didn't have to manipulate these ones in order to evade SourceFire. This is how the packets look like with the 3 destination options header and the fragmentable part. The fragment header, the 2 fragments, and then 2 more destination options headers. So 5 destination options header in total. And regarding the latest Snort version, 2.9.7.
That was in the demo. We have installed the latest Snort version for this demo.
It's still effective, as we saw. And as I said, to make it even more difficult, we have enabled these additional rules, which are not enabled by default.
Without enabling these rules, you even see less. If you're starting, we started playing around with fragmentation and header chains, and we thought, why do we see nothing in Snort at all? Sometimes something pops up. But after we enabled these rules, we got a little bit more information about extension header, if they are chained in the right or in the recommended order or not, or even if there are too many extension header. But without these additional rules enabled, you will see kind of nothing.
And in this slide, we summarize what we did in order to enable these additional rules, because it's not really obvious, to be honest. So you have to edit the snort.conf file, and you have to uncomment the line where the preprocessor rule regarding the decoder rules is there. And then you have to enable some specific, let's say, IPv6 accession header rules. Of course, you can also enable some rules which trigger a warning where atomic fragments are detected. Atomic fragments are the ones whose offset is equal to 0, and at the same time, there are more fragments to follow. Flag is also equal to 0, which means that this is the first and the same time the last fragment. So more or less, this kind of recommendations how to, let's say, harden Snort in order to detect some attacks. I'm going to give some more mitigation techniques later. This is how the Snort Invasion looked like. In this case, we didn't use 3 destination options header, but one hop by hop, one routing header, one destination option header, and then another one in the fragmentable part. This is a fully legitimate traffic according to the RFC 2460, because we don't have more than the recommended number of accession headers in the packet. Again, the next header values are the correct ones. Okay, we had a discussion with the developers of Snort some time ago during the summer, and in the end, at some point, in the release notes of 2.9.7, which actually was released after our Black Hat talk in Amsterdam in October, we found out that they had added this new config option, so-called max IP6 extensions, which was kind of reaction to us, but for another issue. So now you have the ability, let's say, to define the maximum number of accession headers accepted by Snort itself. In order to do this, it's very simple. This is kind of undocumented. I mean that I couldn't find it somewhere else except from the release notes. And we tried it on our own to find out how NTFT works. So if you want to, let's say, mitigate these attacks in case of Snort, and taking into account that you do not expect to see any kind of accession headers in the real world, you can set these configuration options. For example, you can set this config max IP6 accession to 1, which means that in this case, you will accept packets when they have just 1 accession header. Of course, you can set it to 2 if you wish, or 3, etc. You can even set it to 0. In this case, you will actually forbid even fragmentation, since the fragment header itself is an accession header. So this is a kind of, let's say, quick and dirty mitigation technique in case of Snort, which of course works because, as I said, we do not expect to see any kind of accession headers normally, or not, at least not too many in one packet. However, to be honest, I wouldn't believe that this is the best approach on its own from the engineering perspective, because we do not deal with the problem itself, the fact that we do not detect the attack, but we just drop something else in order to avoid the attack. And this is the alert that you get when you configure this option. By default, this value is set to 9. So up to 9 accession headers, you do not get an alert, but when they are more than 9, you get an alert. And of course, as I said, it is also not enabled by default. Okay, now let's discuss some mitigation techniques. In our opinion, okay, we understand the flexibility approach and this approach of be liberal in what you accept. However, it seems that in some cases, RFCs should be more strict if possible. I mean that they should define the exact legitimate usage. Legitimate sender would not send, let's say, more than 3 destinations to header. Why? So why not putting a strict definition over there that defines that there shouldn't be more than destination 2 options header? This can be one approach, because loose specifications result in ambiguities, and ambiguities also can be abused by attackers. Of course, on the other hand, some vendors, or most of them, should make their products fully compliant with the RFCs. For instance, what we saw with Tipping Point, it was a kind of implementation issue and not a kind of RFC issue. It was the fact that they used the next header value of the second header, which made the evasion possible. So it's not only a kind of RFC's fault, but also a kind of implementation from the vendor's perspective. Some technical mitigations. A very good approach to stop most of these attacks is, of course, implementation of RFC 7112, authored by Fernando, who's here. Actually, this approach, when applied, stops most of the attacks. Not all of them, as we saw. For instance, in Tipping Point, it can be evaded even when this one is applied, but at least it stops most of the attacks. So it is still not a panacea. And of course, for the time being, you can configure your firewalls, your devices, your DPS to drop any extensive, let's say, accession headers, more than 1 or more than 2, depending on your environment. Or, if possible, to try to sanitize the traffic before the DPS. Actually, this is how some vendors, let's say, take into consideration this approach. They make it so difficult. They drop accession headers by default, and in order to give you the permission to allow them, you have to edit a very, very specific file, which will be done by network admins only in cases where they know exactly what they want to do. This is an example of sanitization. Scrap the traffic or sanitize it before entering the DPS, so you can easily inspect it. Okay, the most important, let's say, takeaway from our perspective regarding this talk is that it seems that there are some gray areas in IPv6. We just saw one of them. It's so-called accession headers, which can be used to evade devices like IDPSs, access lists, etc., or mechanisms like array-guarded and all this stuff.
TCP/v6.
Of course, there are some other gray areas. In the morning, we gave a talk regarding MLD and how MLD, which comes pre-enabled out of the box in most operating systems, can be abused for several security, let's say, attacks. And of course, to raise IPv6 security awareness. In our opinion, you should test your environment, create a kind of lab, if your organization allows it, in order to test your devices, to check if it implements correctly or not the RFCs, what is possible or not. And of course, the sooner you know about them, the better, since IPv6 is actually already here.
And yeah, and finally, there's a big discussion about, okay, we need extension headers or do we not need them? And in our opinion, it's like, okay, for the moment, if you don't, or evaluate, do you need in your environment or from outside any kind of extension header, like fragmentation? Is this needed in your environment or for your company? And if you say, okay, at the moment we have no need for them or we don't expect them, so let's block them for the moment. But we don't know what's coming in the near future, if there are coming cool features which we only can realize with extension headers. So let's say let's block them for the moment and see what will come in future, and then we can say, okay, this extension header we need for our environments because of this and that feature, and then we will allow it or use it. But to minimize the problems with IPv6 on devices and something like that, it could be a good approach to, from a security point of view, to block them at the moment.
Or at least to block most of them. You may need fragmentation, I don't know.
Yeah.
There are some specific applications that
Or
may need it.
destination option.
But yeah, for sure you can block the rest of them, like routing header or destination push header. Yeah, so at least you can, let's say, raise a bar and make any kind of evasion more, let's say, difficult. Okay, any questions?
Any ideas what can IDPS device or any devices do about IPv6 extension headers from your side, or some mitigation techniques you in your mind what could help to minimize these problems?
How many of you are responsible, let's say, for the policy of your organization of accepting, let's say, specific traffic or not, either directly or indirectly? And what's your policy regarding accession headers?
We don't let any traffic come off it directly. We just keep the proxy, and so it doesn't really, it's not really relevant.
Yeah, but does your proxy, let's say, accept, first of all, have you established an IPv6 connection? Yeah, and do you have any specific policy regarding accession headers?
Well, the only system we talked about outside is a kind of end system. Stone is the speed connection. So usually that is what the system does, not what the system is running. So of course, the IDS won't see all the traffic, but the proxy will see it.
Okay. Okay. Any other comment or recommendation, something? Okay. Good. Yeah.
Question just arrived. There was a slide about evading the IDS where like the 60 instead of the 6.
Yes.
So instead of TCP it's Fragment.
Yes.
And then you said it's also possible in the patch version to evade it with the 6 instead of the 60, which actually should be there.
It's not possible, but you mean to change this one to 6? If you change the first one, you are going to change, actually, even your original target, the end machine, will not understand the exact accession headers here, because it's going to interpret as TCP the next accession header. So in order your technique to be effective, you have to achieve two goals. You have to break a rule in the IDPS device, but at the same time, your target must be able to understand what we are saying. If you turn this to be 6, let's assume that you may be able to evade the device, but your target will not understand the traffic, because what follows here is going to be this, now example, destination push header. So it will misinterpret the traffic.
But
so even if it passes through, you will not get back any response. The goal is to evade the device, the in-between device, but to trigger a response from the target.
actually, we tested all of our combination with fragmentation before we go through the IDPS, or even if we find some which goes through the IDPS, if it works against common operating system.
Exactly.
How is Windows reacting? How is FreeBSD reacting? How is Linux reacting? And to see, even there is variation.
Yeah.
Some of them react different to fragmentation than others. And there's a good white paper from Antonius about that as well.
Yeah, it was presented 1 year ago or
2012.
Yeah, 2012, yeah. I mean that it's easy to find a way to pass through your traffic. That's easy. The difficulty is for this specific traffic to trigger a response from the target.
Also we found many possible ways to get through IDPS device, but the targets on the other side don't respond to that, so
that's usually
it doesn't help us. But maybe for covered channel or something like that, if you have a specific
for
virus or
data, yes,
this could be a news option.
Yes, of course.
So
for some other purposes, covered channels. Yeah. Any other question? Yep.
A very rookie question, I think, but you talked about the sanitization of
yes.
traffic. Just you didn't find any device that does.
No.
We don't know any device as well. No.
Just a suggestion from our side.
I think the only the only idea, or I think at the moment works is with IPv6 tables. You can drop IPv6 extension header. I think if you're playing or you have very good detailed information how you have to configure it, you can even try to get the extension header out of it, but this would be
Actually, you raise a good point here. About a couple of months ago, I was writing a kind of hardening guide for Linux system regarding IPv6. And while I was taking, it was CentOS, the Red Hat clone, I found out that when you extract IP tables, IPv6 tables, to drop fragmentation by the usual rules, this actually is not the case. And I contacted with the developers and I raised even a bug there. And their response was that at some point they changed the code, and now before forwarding the packet, they reassemble the packet and they fragment it again if required. So they more or less do this on their own. Of course, they do not introduce this for sanitization purposes, but for some other stuff. If you search about it, you will find it. But they use this approach. On the other hand, the answer to this would be, okay, according to the RFCs, an intermediate router, let's say, should not reassemble and refragment the packet. Fragmentation does not take place along the path. So officially, this is not a recommended, let's say, approach. But in the end, yes, can be used, at least for this purpose, as a sanitization approach.
So that's the only thing we know for far. Or you can use a proxy, but then you will terminate the session at this and will make another. So this is no. Most of them drop extension headers, but so if you're sending traffic with them, they don't let it through, but they don't send it.
Last year, we had a project here, the so-called RISC project, and we examined a series of firewalls regarding this exactly same techniques. And all the firewalls, all the firewalls. Okay, all the firewalls, let's say, face the same issues. I mean that they suffer from the same issues regarding accession headers. What it saves, let's say, the firewalls from this is that usually in firewalls you have or should have a default allow rule in the end. So if they don't, default deny, excuse me, yes, default deny, exactly. So when they do not understand the traffic, they drop it, which is, of course, what it saves the game regarding firewalls. While in the IPS traffic, they block the traffic when they trigger a specific signature. This is why IDPS devices can be evaded while firewalls cannot be.
You said earlier that you're not expecting a lot of extension headers in the real world. So is there
At least you're not yet.
any kind of best practice? What, from a firewall point of view, I need to accept and which I shouldn't accept?
Well,
which kind of operating systems do what kind of extension headers? But this is a question, are there any systems out there which use extension headers in a way which I have to accept?
well, the answer now depends usually on the person that you ask. I mean that you are going to get different answers from different people. The RNW policy, yeah, you want to say something?
No.
The RNW policy is, or recommendation is drop all accession headers. Drop everything. From my perspective, okay, you can allow fragmentation accession header perhaps, but just this, because on its own, it doesn't hurt. I mean that it's not easy to evade something if you use just a fragmentation header. But it's not just allowing or disallowing some accession headers. It's also some minor details, like, for instance, last year when we checked the firewalls, we found out that some accession headers were dropping type 0 routing headers, which have been deprecated, even when you enable routing headers, which was good, because type 0 is deprecated. So even if you enable routing headers, even if you want to accept, let's say, the new one, type 4, which is going to be specified, you will not allow at the same time the type 0. Some other firewalls were not that, let's say, good on this. I mean that it's not only a question of which ones are going to be enabled, but also some minor details regarding this. But in the end, yes, the best approach if you want to be, let's say, kind of secure, at least regarding this attacking vector, if not all of them, you should allow at most, let's say, fragmentation header. Unless your environment, there is a very, very specific application where you need the one or the other. But if this is the case, you are going to know it.
Are there any well-known notations or operating systems?
The destination option header is used in some, or is the one which is used in some special cases on protocol?
The destination or the hop by hop?
Yeah,
the hop by hop header
is more
which
used.
is used.
Yes,
The hop by hop header, some of its usages are regarding the local link.
Yeah.
For instance, the MLB stuff that we discussed in the morning, the router alert option, the hop by hop header is used, but this is at the local link. So even if you have multicast traffic, you still do not need hop by hop to travel along your network. And hop by hop header is also used in some other protocols like RSVP, if I remember correctly. So yes, there are some cases.
But very special cases.
Yes.
And
very
even
special
these
ones.
cases are more in tests and development than in real world.
And the good thing about the hop by hop header is that it's the only very specific case where the RFC is strict. That it must be in the first one, and it must be just once. And most of the vendors follow this strict, let's say, recommendation. So when we manipulate hop by hop header, many targets weren't responsive. If, for example, we moved hop by hop header in the end, or if there were more than one hop by hop header.
Which is also good for routers, since every router could interpret or have to analyze a packet which includes a hop by hop. So one possible scenario first come in mind, okay, let's put many hop by hop header in it, send it to routers, to router, and all of them have to reassemble them and have to check them, and if they're coming so many packages, would be like a DOS. But many of them just discarded if there are more than one.
Okay. Any other question or comment, suggestion? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.